Well, they've done it again. South Carolina women's basketball is officially back on top in the SEC for the third time in a row. The Gamecocks have won the SEC women's basketball tournament with a 64-45 win over the Texas Longhorns, the number one team in the country, on Sunday afternoon out in Greenville. And for Dawn Staley's crew, like I said before, the third time in a row the Gamecocks have won the tournament title, and the ninth time in program history, all coming under Staley, that the Gamecocks have won the conference tournament. So what is going on, everyone? Happy Sunday. Welcome into GC Live Sunday Reset. A little bit of a special edition. We missed last week because the Clemson series for baseball was going on, ran really late. So we did an edition on Monday morning, but today we are back on schedule, and this time we're going to talk a lot of women's basketball, as like I said before, in case you've been living under a rock today, South Carolina women's basketball defeated Texas in the SEC tournament championship game earlier today out in Greenville. And so before we get rolling talking about all that, got to talk to you guys real quick about our presenting sponsor right above me here if you're watching on screen. But if you're listening, I'm talking about Clint Hammond of CMG Home Loans. If you're in the market to buy a home or you need help with your mortgage and you have no clue where to start, got good news for you. Clint Hammond of CMG Home Loans can help you out. He'll take you through the process step by step, and he'll help you get everything figured out. He's been in the mortgage industry for more than 20 years. He's a lifelong Gamecock fan. He's also a longtime supporter of GamecockCentral.com, and he's always the presenting sponsor of all of our GC Live programs. So if you're interested, give him a call, 803-422-6797. The NMLS number for him is 71597, 71597, I should say. Or you can go to ClintHammond.com for more info. So that will all be right above me here on screen. So let's get down to business here. South Carolina women's basketball. How many times can I say it? They dominated Texas, I thought, today. Won 64-45, and this game felt close a little bit at the beginning. First quarter, 12-10 score. And then that second quarter, I think, is where things really took a turn in the Gamecocks' direction. Held the Longhorns to 6 points and outscored them 21-6 in the second quarter to build up a nice halftime lead. And then from there, it was pretty much all Gamecocks the rest of the way, as they have won this is the best of three now between South Carolina and Texas. The Gamecocks won the initial matchup back in Columbia earlier this season, and then Texas won the return game to Austin later in the year to make it a split. And then obviously the coin flip happened, and if you want to count that, it's another victory for South Carolina because they got the one seed by Greg Sankey flipping a coin and it landing in favor of the Gamecocks to be the top seed in the SEC tournament. And then obviously today picking up a really, really good win to cap off a weekend where, they played Vanderbilt and they played Oklahoma, and those games definitely had their moments where it was tough. And even today against Texas, it's tough at certain points. But again, the common theme with this team is that they always seem to find a way, and they really shut down what, in my opinion, is one of the top teams in the country in Texas. I think any person you talk to with the brain probably could say the same thing. But yeah, obviously, really good performance for Dawn Staley's crew today. Chloe Kitts, who we'll get to in a second, 15 points, 7 of 12 shooting, 9 rebounds. Sanaya Fagan, who hit a three-pointer today, by the way, 11 points, 5 of 7 shooting. Really good performance for her. Tessa Johnson had 14 points. Joyce Edwards had 11. A little bit of a rough day for Malaysia Fulwiley with 5 points on 2 of 10 shooting. But again, the big story of the day, I think, just has to be how much this defense kept Texas in check. You're not going to win many basketball games when, I know this pretty well now, covering the men's side of things where, South Carolina gets outshot by other teams. Same deal today. Texas only shot 29.6% from the floor, went 1 of 8 from three-point range, and really just did not have it compared to South Carolina, who, look, they shot 23% from deep, but they ended up going 42.9% from the field in general. So big difference there, and obviously makes a big difference when you're able to keep players like Harmon to 14 points on 16 of 15 shooting, or 6 of 15 shooting. Booker 10 points, 4 of 13 shooting. We know how important she was in Texas winning the middle game in this series earlier in the year out in Austin. But today, South Carolina really played a clean game of basketball, and it resulted in a big win. And now it begs the question, I think, and we'll get into a little bit more of the SEC championship in a second with some awards and all that stuff. But it does beg the question, and I think most people probably feel this way, especially I know Gamecock fans definitely feel this way. They got to be a 1 seed going into the NCAA tournament now, right? Like I don't think there's much question about it, regardless of what happened today. It might have been a little bit tough considering, Texas is the number 1 team in the country in the AP poll. UConn had beaten South Carolina earlier this year. They're in the top 5. And then you got the 2 Southern California schools with UCLA and Southern Cal in the Big Ten kind of duking it out, as the other 2 teams in there. So I think obviously now for sure, I think we're going to see South Carolina as a top seed, number 1 seed in the tournament field. And that means they would get to host the first 2 rounds of the round of 64 and the round of 32, and then go play in the Sweet 16 and the Elite 8 if they get that far out in either Spokane, Washington, or Birmingham, Alabama. We'll see what happens. Obviously, I think it'd be a lot more convenient for everyone that watches South Carolina and is a fan of this program, or I should say a fam, that it would be in Birmingham for the second weekend. So that way, no one, who wants to travel all the way out to Washington? I know people will, but that's a long trip compared to going just driving a few hours to the great state of Alabama. But I think there's no doubt they will definitely be a 1 seed. I'd be shocked if they weren't at this point. The more interesting thing is, will they be a top, like the national seed, like the top overall seed going into the tournament? Because the resume speaks for itself. More quad 1 wins than anyone. They always play a tough schedule. So, when they have as many wins as they do, they're beating good competition. You could obviously say the losses to UCLA, Texas, and UConn, especially that loss to UConn, maybe takes them out of that conversation for being the highest seed in the tournament. But I think you look at how well this team has played outside of those 3 games. I think it's just they are just a very well-rounded team that any given day, go play those teams now in a neutral setting. How does South Carolina, how much different would those games be? We saw it today against Texas. It's almost a home game for South Carolina, being in Greenville, just a few hours away from Columbia here. And, I know Vic Schaefer, Texas head coach, knew that going into the game that it was going to basically be a road game for the Longhorns. And it definitely obviously was. Gamecock fans, they travel well. And given that the fact it's a few hour drive over to the upstate, they're going to pack it out. And they certainly did. But I do think, end of the day, I think South Carolina for sure will be a 1 seed going into March Madness here in a little bit over a week and a half, and then, or 2 weeks actually from now. And then we'll see if they are the top overall seed. But I wouldn't be surprised if they're the number 1 overall seed. But again, I definitely do think you can pretty much lock them in to be hosting games at CLA in the first 2 rounds, which is always a big advantage. They're going to be playing the first round, they'll be playing a 16 seed that they should beat pretty handedly. And then, the round of 32 can always present a little bit of issues because you're probably playing an 8 or a 9 seed at that point. But if you're South Carolina, you still feel like you're going to be able to get through to the second weekend, no problem. And then from there, I think it really just depends on, I think this team could probably win any game at this point, but the matchup is always something to keep an eye on. Like, what happens if you run into UCLA or UConn again at some point, which I don't think would probably happen given the fact that those teams will be 1 seeds probably until like the Final Four. But what if you face a team that's similar to them? And, that's always the question, I think. But overall, like I said before, match those teams up again, how much different are those outcomes? Like when South Carolina played UCLA back in all the way back in like November, I mean, that was a much different time compared to now. I think that team is a lot more, they've handled adversity. That loss to UConn a few weeks ago really could have kind of dampened them after getting blown out at home, but it didn't. And they have just been on a roll ever since. And they'll take it into the NCAA tournament where they're looking to go back to back. And it's something that is going to be tough to do, but hey, why not? Why not them? If there's any team that's going to be doing it, it would probably be South Carolina in this day and age. And so getting back to the SEC tournament, again, like I said, South Carolina beat Texas 64-45 this afternoon, clinching their third straight tournament championship. But the all-tournament team has come out. No surprise here. Chloe Kitts made the all-tournament team. She also won the most outstanding player award. I mean, she was dominant throughout this entire 3-game stretch. Really well-deserved there. Mylasia Fulwiley also on the tournament team. Sanaya Fagan rounds out the Gamecock trio that makes the all-tournament team. And then you got Madison Booker and Anissa Morrow from Texas and LSU, respectively, making the cut as well. But a very Gamecock-heavy all-tournament team. And here's another stat for you guys. Dawn Staley is now 5-0 against Texas head coach Vic Schaefer in SEC tournament championship games. 7-0 overall in postseason games. So given the fact that Dawn is obviously outside of, Vic beating her earlier this year in Austin, really dominated this rivalry, if you want to call it that, between Vic and Dawn. And in postseason games, when it really matters most, it's always South Carolina stepping up and beating, whether it's Texas or when Vic was at Mississippi State, the same deal. So look, not much more you could say other than she just owns him. I think that's really what it comes down to. And, Texas, they'll be fine. I think the other side of the whole number one seed in the NCAA tournament argument is what happens with Texas now? Because not to stray the conversation too much away from South Carolina, but you got to think about it. They were the number one team in the country, in the AP poll going into this game. I know in terms of seeding and stuff, South Carolina is the one seed in the SEC tournament, but again, it's by a coin flip. But what happens to them? Do they end up dropping down to a 2 seed potentially? The highest 2 seed, or do they remain a 1? I think you got to keep them at a 1. It's just who are you going to potentially, take out of those potential home games in the first 2 rounds? Is it going to be one of the California schools? Is it going to be UConn? I mean, we'll see, but I definitely think, all things considered, the SEC should have 2 top 4 seeds going into March Madness here in a few weeks, where South Carolina is a 1 seed, and Texas, I think, definitely should be as well. But hey, losing by 19 points, I mean, it is South Carolina at the end of the day, but that's it's definitely not a pretty loss, if you will. It's one thing to lose close, but to kind of get blown out, lose by double digits, that's another thing there. So again, South Carolina, we will wait and see where they are going to be. Obviously, I would assume they're going to be playing in Columbia here in 2 weeks, but also who are they going to play? Those matchups, what does the bracket look like? That information will all come out relatively soon. Not today, but in the next few days, next Sunday on Selection Sunday and all that. So yeah, good win for the women's basketball team. And now let's go ahead and shift the conversation over briefly to everything else that happened this weekend. Obviously, softball is in the midst of a really important weekend series with number 1 Oklahoma out in Norman. Last time I checked, softball was locked into a 9-9 tie going into the 7th inning, I believe. So I'm sure that game's gone final by now. I'm going to take a quick look and see because that was going on while I started the show here. But big series there. I think South Carolina has definitely handled their own going into that, and they did end up losing 10-9. So they've dropped the series, unfortunately. But I think given the fact that they've lost 2 one-run games, really played well for the most part in both of them. You're going against the defending champs in the in college softball. Like, it's going to be tough beating the number one team in their place. And I think South Carolina's played very well this weekend. It's just you lose a pair of one-run games, and now you hope to salvage the series and take a game here. And look, there's no moral victories in losing 2 games in a row. But given the fact that South Carolina softball just has not been this level of good in a very long time, it says a lot that they can go out here and definitely hold their own against the best team in all of college softball. And again, they could win this game later on today. They have a doubleheader today. They lost game 1 10-9. They can win this game and feel pretty good about themselves heading back. Maybe they drop a spot in the rankings. I think that would be kind of like, I get it. If you get swept this weekend, you probably should drop a spot or two, but nothing more beyond that, because again, they should be probably a top 5 team in the country, just given the way they have played all season. If it weren't for them starting unranked, maybe they would be, a top 3, top 5 team in the country. But given the fact that, like I said, they started out unranked, a little tougher to get there. But hey, softball, very good start to the year for them. And, 2 losses does not make or break a season. And just like with baseball, losing that series to Clemson last week, and we'll shift the conversation over now to baseball. Like I said, losing that series to Clemson last week, let alone getting swept, not ideal, but same deal with softball here. Three losses does not make a season, make or break a season, I should say. And we saw how they've responded this week, and I think it's been very good as the Gamecocks won their midweek games over Davidson and the Citadel earlier in the week. And just now this weekend, wrapping up a little while ago, the Gamecocks swept Morehead State in a 3-game series, rounding it out with a 1-0 victory on Sunday afternoon at Founders Park. Pretty good weekend for the Gamecocks. I would say this game today, very, like the comment here from EXO says, what was that? I mean, a very weird game today where not much offense or anything like that. But hey, they got the win, and that's really what matters. But before we dive into that 1-0 game, I do want to go back, talk about the games in order, starting with Friday night. South Carolina, game 1 of the weekend series with the Eagles, wins 11-7 behind a 5-run 8th inning that started with Jordan Carrion getting an RBI hit to tie the game, and then Ethan Petrie Carrion had the go-ahead hit, and then Ethan Petrie making the difference, providing a little bit of cushion with a long, I don't know if that ball's even landed yet, but a long 3-run blast to give South Carolina the 5 spot in the 8th, and then finishing it off in the 9th. And look, this was a game that they fell behind early. Matthew Becker did not have his best stuff at all. Did not make it through the 2nd inning, as he only made it an inning and 2/3, and gave up 4 runs, all earned. He had a few misfortunes in his outing with a few balls that were hit weirdly and whatnot. But the point is, he got roughed up, and that's that. So Brandon Stone came in after him, pitched very well, gave up 2 runs, struck out 9 over 5 2/3 innings. Basically a start, if you will. And we'll see what happens this weekend, but I would very much expect some shakeup in the rotation, and I'll share my thoughts on how that might look in a little bit here after we recap the whole series. But Tyler Pitzer closed it out with a 1 2/3 innings of 1 hit, no runs given up, 2 strikeouts, picking up his 3rd win on the year. Good win for South Carolina there to kick off the series. Then yesterday, 16-11 win over Morehead State. One that has definitely received a bit of criticism in the fact that South Carolina was notably up 12-1 going into the 4th inning. The Gamecocks had a nearly 40-minute bottom of the 3rd inning where they scored 7 runs, really just demolished Morehead State's pitching staff, having to put 3 pitchers in during the bottom of the 3rd, and one of them, their starter, got hurt with an injury and had to leave the game. So hopefully that guy is going to be okay. But 12-1 going to the fourth inning. Jake McCoy, Saturday starter, comes back out and just did not look the same as he did through the first 3 innings. I think and Paul Maneri did talk about it yesterday and even again today about the fact that he talked to Jake in between, during that rally where South Carolina scored 7 runs, and he asked him if he wanted to maybe go, play catch outside just to kind of stay loose and whatnot. And McCoy was basically like not wanting to, I guess. Maneri added a little bit more context, saying that Jake felt a little bit lazy about doing that, and obviously, looking back on it, probably should have, because he gave up 4 runs in that fourth inning to give Morehead State a little bit of fight to get back into the game. And then, after McCoy came out, Ashton Crowther came in, gave up 6 runs, 4 of them being earned over an inning and 2/3. And just like that, this was a 3-run ball game going into the 7th inning. But thanks to some RBI hits by Bo Hollins and Caden Gaskin, South Carolina was able to take a 5-run lead and some really stellar pitching at the end of the game. For as rough as the pitching looked at times on Saturday, the final 3 1/3 innings were very nice to see. Zach Russell and Parker Marlott combined to toss 3 1/3 innings, like I said, no runs given up, and kept a very, very good Eagles offense in check. Make no mistake about it. I know it is a mid-major program, and you look at them and they're like, oh, South Carolina should have easily ruled them and all this and that. This is a very good offense, though. They have some really good players on their team, like Hunter Thomas had hit 7 homers and 25 RBIs coming into the weekend. South Carolina kept him in check. You have Davis Gurman, another guy that very solid player who just made some stellar plays in the outfield and with the bat was really just on another level this weekend with a pair of homers on Saturday. And then, South Carolina was just really able to kind of pitch well against the rest of the lineup. But obviously, giving up 11 runs is not ideal by any stretch of the imagination. And that takes us into game 3 here. As I mentioned earlier, a very boring, if you will, kind of game. Not much offense, not much going on. A bit more of a pitcher's duel. And I mentioned it a little bit in my Leaving the Yard post-game recap. This weekend really had a little bit of everything for the common baseball fan. If you like a late rally in a game, that's what Friday was like. If you like an offensive explosion where 27 runs in total are scored, that was Saturday. And if you like a good old-fashioned pitcher's duel where not much offense, but some nice defense and really good pitching, that's what Sunday was like. And South Carolina, just for the life of them, could not get much going against Morehead State starter Bradley Pointer, who went 7 innings, gave up 1 run, which came the 5th inning on an RBI single by Nathan Hall. That proved to be the difference as Hall had a 2-hit game. But outside of that, South Carolina just could not do much with the bats. 5 hits on the day, went 1 for 9 with 2 outs, 2 for 9 with runners on, and 1 for 7 with runners in scoring position. But on the flip side, the Eagles were struggling just as much as South Carolina, maybe even a little bit worse, because they went with 4 hits, 0 for 8 with 2 outs, 3 for 13 with runners on, and 1 for 9 with runners in scoring position. And the 2 biggest situations in this game, in my opinion, were the bases loaded spots where that 4th inning, after Dylan Eskew pitched 3 innings and didn't have his best stuff, gave up 4 walks, but didn't allow any runs or anything like that, only 1 hit, got taken out in the 4th inning when he put a few runners on. And then Jackson Susie comes in, gives up an immediate hit to load the bases with nobody out. And you're thinking, oh, man, this is where the Eagles are going to get at least 1 run, right? Probably a little bit more if they're lucky here. And they ended up not getting any runs because you get a foul pop to Bo Hollins on the first base side and then a massive inning-ending double play to escape trouble. So that got South Carolina off the hook there and kept the game scoreless, and then they got their run to take the lead eventually. And then later in the game, Tyler Pitzer, who pitched 3 really solid innings, he had a 1-2-3 inning in his first inning, and then the 3rd inning he pitched also had a 1-2-3 inning in the 8th. But it was that middle inning in the 7th where he got himself into some trouble. Morehead State had loaded the bases with 2 outs, and then Pitzer got a huge strikeout to get out of it. So that's the difference in the game right there. Not being able to convert with runners in scoring position, let alone bases loaded, not once but twice. And South Carolina gets away with a really tough win. And, in the 9th inning there, Brendan Sweeney had put a pair of runners on with 1 out, but got a strikeout and a foul pop to Bo Hollins again to end the game. So be able to come away with a victory like that, it is what it is. You take the wins as you get them, right? They're not all going to be 16 and 11 runs that you score. Sometimes you're going to have to find ways to win that aren't through scoring a dozen runs. Maybe it's, like today, getting out of a pair of bases loaded jams, having your pitching staff have a much better outing to get the job done. That's what it took, and it was a really impressive bounce-back performance for this pitching staff that has looked really good ever since the 6th inning on Saturday, where Zach Russell had come in with 2 outs and got the first out, and then it's just been really strong from there. So the Gamecocks are now 14-3 on the year. They have a midweek game on Wednesday night against Georgia State, and then the real fun begins, SEC play. Next weekend, starting Friday night at 7 p.m., Oklahoma comes to town for a big, really big 3-game series, and that's how a lot of people are going to judge this team, right or wrong. People don't care, maybe not the common fan necessarily cares what South Carolina did against a random opponent like Morehead State. Like the thought process is probably going to be, let's see what they do in SEC play to see how you really judge this team. And I can honestly probably agree with that, because these next 30 games that start with Oklahoma on Friday, and then you get into Arkansas, and then Tennessee comes to town, et cetera, et cetera. It goes from there. Every weekend is going to matter. And if South Carolina can find a way to go 500 or better, I think that's a big win in a lot of people's eyes. And there's going to be times where it's going to be tough. They're going to probably lose a series at some point. They're also probably going to win a few series throughout this stretch. And I think they are just about ready to go for conference play. They've looked very good. And I think if you gave someone a blind test and told them that, assuming South Carolina could beat Georgia State on Wednesday, never a guarantee, obviously, because you just never know what can happen in midweek games. But if you told someone right now that going into conference play, this team would be potentially 15-3 with SEC play starting on Friday, I think you take that. And yes, the losses came against your arch rival in Clemson. And outside of that, you really didn't beat anyone super noteworthy, but wins are wins. And the way South Carolina's won some of these games hasn't always been pretty. It's had to force them to come through in tough situations, which they have more times than not. But besides the Clemson series, I think this team has looked pretty solid, and there's been a few ups, obviously some downs, but overall, you take the record as it is, and I think this team is ready for conference play. Now, they do need to figure out what this rotation is going to look like, because it's not ideal when none of your starting pitchers this weekend made it into the 5th inning. Like I said before, Becker only lasted an inning and 2/3. McCoy made it through 4 innings, and then Eskew today didn't make it through the 4th. So in conference play, you're going to definitely want your rotation, which we thought was for sure strong point of this team, can get you through any series. But if you're going to pitch like this, and I know it's one weekend, so Paul Maneri's not worried about it, so I don't think we should be either. But you see it, and it's just like it's a little bit concerning, I think, at least to me, that the pitching staff, that the rotation didn't provide a ton of length this weekend. And you can live with that for a series or two. But if it became a constant thing where you're just not getting enough length out of your starting pitching, that's going to be really taxing on your bullpen. And you had to use a few different guys this weekend. Pitzer, you had to use twice this weekend over a handful of innings, but he was able to pitch very well. And luckily, South Carolina's got some good arms in the bullpen to be able to get the job done again. It wasn't perfect for the bullpen, gave up some runs, but specifically on Sunday, very good outing. And to be able to shut a team out anytime you do it, I don't care who it's against, I feel like that's very impressive. So heading into the weekend, we will see what this rotation does ultimately look like. I do think we're going to see a change on Friday. I think Matthew Becker probably moves to the bullpen. I think you move not Brandon Stone to that spot, but move Jake McCoy up to Friday. I just think it's got to happen here at some point where he's your most electric pitcher. If it weren't for that fourth inning where right before that, it was a 40-minute bottom of the third where you score 7 runs and stuff. If it was just a normal half inning where South Carolina gets a run or two and then McCoy comes back out for the fourth, I think that outing looks a lot different. And he was around 50 pitches. So I think he ends up getting to maybe the 6th. And we're not talking about the rotation struggling at all like they did at times this weekend. So I think you got to move McCoy to Friday. I think you leave SQ on Sunday. And then I think you put Brandon Stone in that 2 spot on Saturday. And I really think that is the way it should look. I think Becker has pitched pretty well throughout this season. Obviously, the first 2 outings of the year were solid, but these last 2 against Clemson didn't have his best stuff. Ended up pitching into the 4th inning and pitched a good 3rd and got Cam Kennerell out in the 4th, but again, those first 2 innings were very much a struggle. And then, he retires the side in order in the 1st on Friday. And then that 2nd inning, things kind of just fell apart for him. And he only recorded 2 outs. So I think a change has got to be made, right or wrong. I understand it's a small sample size, but, in SEC play, you can't really afford to be taking, any chances. And you want your best guys out there. And right now, there's no denying it. Brandon Stone is pitching very well for South Carolina. It's not just the one outing he had that was really good on Friday. Like he's been like this throughout the entire course of the season. He's got a 1.93 ERA through 5 appearances, 18 2/3 innings pitched, and has only given up 4 earned runs with 23 strikeouts and 3 walks. I think, needless to say, he needs to be in your weekend rotation moving forward. Doesn't mean it's going to be like that by the time we get to SEC tournament play or, a regional if South Carolina can make it there. But for now, I think you have to make this change to where, regardless of what the order is, you got to have McCoy, SQ in there. SQ, I think, will be a little bit better. Just got to get the command down. Same with McCoy. But when those 2 pitchers are on and they're hitting their spots, we saw it against Clemson, one of the better offenses, I think, in the country. They really kept them in check, giving up a combined 3 runs over the 12 innings they pitched over the weekend against the Tigers. And then Stone, I think, has to be in this rotation too, just given the fact that he's done this before, coming out of the bullpen early in a game now for Becker twice and pitching really well and keeping South Carolina in the game and in turn saving the bullpen from having a very long night. So we'll learn more about what's to come with the weekend ahead against Oklahoma. Again, South Carolina still has a midweek game with Georgia State on Wednesday, but we'll hear from Mainieri on Thursday in his weekly media availability. And we'll learn what the rotation looks like, anything else that changed. Talmadge Lee Crow is back in the lineup today for South Carolina at catcher. That's another noteworthy thing. Kennedy Jones made it back into the lineup this weekend as well. And yeah, I think South Carolina is starting to get a little bit healthier, but at the same time, Lee Crow's broken thumb or fractured thumb is still a fractured thumb, and he's playing through it right now. But Mainieri did say that today it felt pretty good for him, and he didn't have any noteworthy at bats or anything. Did draw a walk, had a few flyouts and whatnot, and allowed 3 stolen bases on throws that were a little bit off the mark. Had to pull Jordan Carrion a little bit off the bag for trying to make a tag at second base. But besides that, it's good to see him back in the lineup, and we'll see what happens moving forward for him. And then Kennedy Jones is back now, and still got to get a few more guys healthy with Gavin Brayland and Dalton Mayshore. But so far, so good. South Carolina 14-3 on the year with SEC play on the horizon. So I think that's going to do it for now. Again, South Carolina, big weekend in general for Gamecock athletics. Women's basketball winning the SEC tournament in convincing fashion over Texas today. Baseball sweeping their weekend series with Morehead State. Softball in some tough luck, losing a pair of one-run games to Oklahoma, but still has a chance to salvage the series finale at the time of going live here on Sunday afternoon, now going into Sunday evening. And then this week, got a lot going on. Men's basketball, I'll be in Nashville for the SEC tournament on the men's side, starting on, well, Tuesday's an open practice, but Wednesday, the Gamecocks will take on John Calipari's Arkansas squad in the first round of the tournament, first game, in fact, out in Nashville at 1 p.m. And then baseball begins a 3-game series with Oklahoma starting on Friday. And then, Selection Sunday will be around the corner. So, for women's basketball, of course. So, that's going to do it for now for this edition of GC Live Sunday Reset. Appreciate all of you guys tuning in. Got a lot of people watching here. Really appreciate it as always. We'll be back again next Sunday to recap, hopefully not just the baseball series, but a lot of other good things going on. Softball will be going on. We'll see what happens with men's basketball, and we'll go from there. So if you're not already, be sure to subscribe to GamecockCentral.com, where you can get all this great info with women's basketball going on as they are heading to the NCAA tournament as a potential 1 seed after just winning the SEC tournament today. Men's basketball coverage. The season is slowly coming to an end with the SEC tournament this week, and we'll see if they lose, that's it for them probably. And it begins a long offseason of figuring things out. And then baseball and softball, we got coverage all season long as things are really just now starting to heat up. So appreciate you guys all tuning in. Have a great rest of your weekend, and I will see you guys again next Sunday. Until then,